St. Petersburg's newspaper killer. In the summer of 1996, a simple newspaper ad led to a brutal double murder in a quiet stairwell in St. Petersburg. It wasn't a mafia hit. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was something far more terrifying, a murder for hire born from a 10-word classified ad. One that read, "Willing to do any dangerous work. No questions asked." This is the story of how post-Soviet chaos turned desperation into violence, of how a broken ex-con, craving an apartment, found a weapon in a newspaper, and how a lonely student, mentally unstable, shunned by society, answered the call. Two innocent women were slaughtered at their own front door. The killer struck with homemade nunchucks, vanishing into the shadows. The husband had a motive, but his fingerprints didn't match. And the deeper the police dug, the darker the truth became. Was the killer insane or perfectly manipulated? This investigation led Detective Evgeny Lev into the underworld of Russia's booming newspaper industry, where jobs, guns, and death could be found under a single ad. This is not just a murder story. It's a glimpse into a society where survival meant selling your soul. And a killer could be anyone holding a copy of Reklama Shans. Unsolved Soviet Crimes, St. Petersburg's newspaper killer, where ink and blood bled from the same pages. And long after the trial ended, one question still remains unanswered. Who really planned the murder? In 1990s Russia, newspapers didn't just sell furniture or jobs. They sold access to human lives, sometimes even their end. St. Petersburg, 1996. The air was heavy with transition, like breathing through wet cloth soaked in ink and fear. The Soviet Union had collapsed, and something darker had risen in its place. Freedom without rules, capitalism without conscience. And at the center of it all were newspapers. Not the kind that spoke truth to power. Those were mostly gone. No, these were survival guides printed on cheap paper. Thousands of copies, dozens of pages, ads upon ads upon ads. Buy old carpets. Exchange VCRs. Looking for wife. Need a strong man for risky job. It was called Reklama Shans, the chance ad, and it offered everything, especially to those with nothing to lose. The rise of paper empires. After the collapse, Russians didn't turn to politicians for solutions. They turned to pages. Newspapers became gods, and the classifieds were their scripture. Anyone could write an ad. Anyone could answer. No background checks, no contracts, no laws, a piano for rent, a room to share, a daughter missing. Each ad told a story, and between them, a silent war for survival. St. Petersburg became a city buzzing with these deals. On street corners, train stations, stairwells, people whispered offers like prayers. The paper ink stained your hands and your fate. And somewhere in that sea of desperation, a new kind of predator learned to hunt. Job hunting or soul selling. For many, newspapers were the only lifeline. Unemployment was rampant. Factories stood silent. Soldiers returned home to empty fridges. And so the ads changed. Beautiful girls wanted. No experience. Work abroad. Big money. No questions. We'll do anything. Dangerous work welcome. You could hear the city groaning under the weight of these pleas. A father trying to feed his child. A student trying to pay rent. And others just trying to matter. One such ad would later send shockwaves across Russia. It was only 10 words. It had no punctuation, but it carried blood. We'll do any dangerous job, no questions, fast learner. At the time, it looked like any other desperate cry. But hidden beneath those letters was the seed of a double homicide. Classifieds and crime alongside job offers, darker things crept in. Gun sales disguised as antiques. Prostitution buried under massage. Stolen goods, smuggled electronics, even human trafficking, coded through clever abbreviations and vague phrasing. But the real danger wasn't in the ad itself. It was in the person who might answer. Imagine this. You're broke. You're angry. You see an ad from a man saying he'll do anything. You don't need to ask questions. You already know he's willing to break the law. All you need to do is pick up the phone. That's what one man did. And that call would end 2 lives and ruin 3 more. A city on the edge. The newspapers turned every reader into a buyer, every buyer into a traitor, every traitor into a possible victim. You could feel it walking through the metro, eyes avoiding contact, wallets clutched tight. In stairwells, whispers of robbery, disappearances, scams. It wasn't the KGB people feared anymore. It was the man who read your ad. A girl looking for a nanny? She might get trafficked. A pensioner selling his dacha? He might get beaten. A mother trying to rent a room? She might not survive the night. This was the new reality. Commerce had replaced community, and trust was the first casualty. The calm before the murder. In July 1996, something terrible was already in motion, but no one saw it coming. Not Irina, not her mother Raisa, not even the man who would later investigate their deaths. They were just women living modestly, not rich, not famous, just in the wrong apartment. And someone out there was looking for exactly that. A woman with something to lose, a flat worth inheriting, a reason to disappear. The plan didn't begin with blood. It began with paper. A classified ad in Reklama Shans, a desperate student looking for danger, and a husband with a past and a motive. But before the knife, before the police tape, before the stairwell soaked in blood, there was only the sound of fingers on a phone dial and the soft rustle of a newspaper turning its next deadly page. They didn't open the door to a killer. He was already waiting at it. July 26, 1996. Late afternoon. The stairwell at 43 Polyostrovsky Prospect was still. No screams, no alarm, just the dull buzz of flies and the thick metallic scent of blood drying on concrete. 2 women lay crumpled on the landing between floors, one barely alive, one already gone. Neighbors didn't hear the attack, but they heard the silence that followed. The call that broke the quiet. It started with a knock. Raisa Rukavishnikova, 67, opened the apartment door like she always did, without fear. Next to her stood her daughter, Irina, 39, quiet, cautious, recovering from a messy marriage. What happened next took under a minute. What it left behind still haunts the building to this day. Homemade nunchucks, metal rods, chain-wrapped, crashed into skulls, tore through bone. Blood sprayed the walls like ink. Keys fell from Irina's hand. A scream was choked midair. By the time someone finally opened their door, the stairwell was a crime scene. Enter Detective Evgeny Lev. When Detective Lev arrived, he knew one thing instantly. This wasn't random. There were no signs of struggle inside the apartment, no forced entry, no missing valuables, no drugs, no gang markings, no sloppy rage. This was clean, controlled, close. The attacker knew exactly when to strike, between Irina placing the key in the door and opening it fully. And he didn't fumble. He finished the job with cold efficiency, then vanished. Lev crouched by the blood-stained wall and whispered to himself, this wasn't a robbery. This was a message. But from whom? A family without enemies. Raisa was a retired tram conductor. Irina had worked odd jobs, once as a seamstress, once at a post office. They weren't political. They weren't rich. They barely had enough to live. So why would anyone want them dead? That was the question that echoed through the building like a gunshot no one heard. Lev checked their bank accounts. Nothing. He interviewed neighbors. No threats. He checked criminal databases. No ties. Only one detail stood out. The apartment. a two-bedroom flat in a well-connected district, in a city where real estate was often worth killing for. The apartment theory. When Lev looked into property records, something clicked. Irina had only recently married. Her husband, Leonid Andronov, was older, mid-40s, a former convict. Neighbors described him as cold and calculated. He moved in quickly after the wedding, treated the flat like his own from day one. But shortly before the murder, Irina had threatened divorce. She and her mother wanted him out. Under Russian housing laws, a divorce could push Andronov onto the street, especially if Irina and Raisa had the paperwork. But if they died, he would inherit the flat by default. The forensics that didn't fit. It should have been an open and shut case. A bitter husband. A valuable flat. 2 dead women. Motive? Clear. Only one problem. No physical evidence tied him to the scene. Fingerprints on the stair rail? Didn't match. Shoe prints in the blood? Wrong size. Hair samples? Unrelated. It was like someone else had done the killing, and done it well. Lev stared at the photos, the bodies, the layout. It was too clean for a crime of passion, too perfect for a petty thief. He didn't do it, he told his partner, but he made sure someone did. The echo of the kill. That night, Lev sat in his car parked near the crime scene. He stared up at the dim stairwell window. The air outside was still, but inside his chest, a storm. He'd seen contract killings before, but never this silent, never this personal. A mother and daughter, no fight, no warning. Just an execution, neatly staged between the 5th and 6th floor. And somewhere out there, someone was reading tomorrow's paper, not for the headlines, but for the classifieds. A city begins to watch its doors. Word of the killings spread fast. Neighbors changed their locks. Tenants refused to answer the door at night. Some started carrying kitchen knives in their purses. This wasn't a drug hit. This wasn't a drunken fight. This was a planned murder, the kind that meant it could happen to anyone, anywhere. Lev knew it was only the beginning. He could feel it in the tension of the hallway, in the silence of the survivors, in the way Raisa's blood soaked the cement and refused to dry. Something far bigger had been set in motion, and it had started, with a key, a door, and a killer already waiting. He didn't swing the weapon, but every detail said, this man wanted them dead. 3 days after the murders. The air in St. Petersburg had turned heavier, stickier, as if the city itself was sweating a secret. Detective Evgeny Lev stared at the case file, the edges smudged with his own fingerprints. 2 victims, no robbery, no forced entry, no sign of the killer. But the motive? It was beginning to scream. A name in the shadows, Leonid Andronov, 44, recently paroled. 3 prior convictions, assault, fraud, and illegal possession of weapons. Irina's husband. Lev had heard the name whispered by neighbors. He was always watching her. They argued every week. He said the flat would be his one way or another. The detective didn't need more suspicion. He needed proof. But proof was slippery in post-Soviet Russia, and Leonid knew how to keep his hands clean. A dangerous man. Lev went back through the records. Andronov had served time in a Siberian colony. Hard time. The kind that teaches men how to hurt quietly and how to use others to do it. The marriage had been hasty. Within weeks of release, Leonid married Irina and moved into her apartment. A middle-aged ex-con with no stable income and no assets, suddenly with a legal claim to real estate. Too convenient. And then came the divorce. 2 weeks before the murder, Irina had contacted a lawyer, told friends she wanted him gone. Even changed the lock, but didn't file an eviction order. That mistake may have cost her life. Who gains what? Lev pulled a cigarette from the crushed pack in his desk drawer. He didn't smoke it, just held it between his fingers like a fuse. He opened the housing file again. Legally, if Irina died, her closest relative and spouse stood to inherit everything. The mother, Raisa, would be next in line, but if both women were dead, it all went to Leonid. Motivation, motive, inheritance, check. But fingerprints, alibi, connection to the murder weapon? Nothing. Andronov had an airtight excuse. He was allegedly out of the city visiting his brother. No train tickets, no proof, but no physical evidence to place him at the crime scene either. Something's missing. Lev stared at the photo again. Blood on the stairwell. The position of the bodies. The angle of the attack. This wasn't a brawl. It was fast, efficient, brutal. The use of homemade nunchucks pointed to something unusual, not impulsive, but prepared. This was someone who trained, or someone who planned. Either way, it didn't fit Leonid's physicality or style. He didn't do it himself, Lev murmured. He found someone who would. Digging deeper, Lev ran checks on Leonid's known associates, cellmates, ex-colleagues, former neighbors. He looked for muscle, for hired hands. But the old-school criminal underworld had changed. The mafia had gone corporate. The new killers weren't gangsters. They were freelancers, people who answered newspaper ads, people who offered services no one dared speak of aloud. Lev remembered something from Irina's letters, something she told a friend. He reads the paper for hours, just sits there and circles things. The Reklama Shans newspaper, the classifieds. Lev grabbed a stack of back issues and dropped them on his desk. Hundreds of ads, cheap goods, dating offers, sketchy jobs. And then, one line stood out, 10 words that changed everything. We'll do any dangerous job, no questions, fast learner. It was printed near the bottom of a July 15th edition. No name, no photo, just a phone number. But the tone was chilling, too direct, too raw. Lev traced the number. It led to a cheap student dorm in the city's north, registered to a Dmitry Kashnitsky, 23, expelled from university, unemployed, no priors. But the photo on file told Lev everything he needed. Thin, pale, eyes like empty glass. Someone who wanted to be invisible. Lev looked again at the murder weapon. Nunchucks, improvised, something a hobbyist or a lonely young man might build. A new theory emerges. Andronov didn't need to kill. He needed to hire. And Kashnitsky, he was perfect, desperate, anonymous, untraceable, and looking for dangerous work. Lev imagined the meeting, a dim stairwell, a cigarette lit, cash passed hand to hand. Here's the address. 2 women, no witnesses. Do it clean. Time was running out. Lev knew the deeper he went, the closer he got to answers and to silence. Because if this theory was right, then Andronov had orchestrated everything from the shadows. And now, his killer was walking free. Somewhere in the city, maybe circling another ad, maybe waiting for the next call. The walls of Lev's office seemed to press in. The scent of stale paper, ink, and a crime unresolved. He took a breath and whispered to himself, I don't need him to confess. I just need him to make one mistake. One killer hid behind a mask. The other hid behind a classified ad. August 1996. A desk lamp flickered in the corner of the police archives. Detective Evgeny Lev sat surrounded by newspapers. The smell of old ink and heat from the city crept into the room like a fog of memory and sweat. He flipped through issue after issue of Reklama Shans, the most chaotic job board in post-Soviet Russia. Some ads offered massages, others sold rusted microwaves or begged for loans. And then came the line, the one he couldn't forget. We'll do any dangerous job. No questions. Fast learner. Lev circled it in red. That was the moment the case changed forever. A phone number with blood on it. The phone number listed in the ad traced back to a shared line in a low-income student dormitory. Room 207. Name on file: Dmitry Kashnitsky. Age 23. Expelled physics student. No job, no friends, no family in the city. But one detail stuck out. He was once known for building homemade firecrackers. A quiet boy, a loner, loved explosives, talked to himself, stared at walls. No record, no flags. Just forgotten. Exactly the kind of person who might whisper yes to a stranger offering cash for silence and violence. Lev stared at the grainy ID photo of Kashnitsky. Something about the eyes, like no one lived behind them. Who was Dmitry Kashnitsky? Digging into his past revealed fragments of a broken person. As a child, Kashnitsky had been hospitalized for prolonged silence. Diagnosed with social anxiety, maybe something more. But post-Soviet records were spotty, and no one had followed up. His teachers described him as brilliant but distant. His classmates, creepy, always watching, never speaking. After being expelled from university for chronic absenteeism, he vanished from formal life. But he didn't vanish from the city. Witnesses reported seeing him at job centers, pawn shops, once even at a judo class. He watched everyone, but no one ever watched him. Connecting the threads, Lev built a timeline. July 15th, the ad was printed. July 17th, phone call made from Andronov's apartment to the dorm line. July 20th, Kashnitsky seen near Polyustrovsky Prospect. July 26th, Irina and Raisa murdered. It all fit. But no confession, no weapon, just a newspaper trail and a name. Lev knew the court wouldn't accept suspicion. He needed something undeniable, so he decided to flush the killer out. Setting the trap, Lev sent 2 officers to room 207. They knocked politely. No answer. They knocked again. Still nothing. Then a voice, thin, reedy, cautious. "I didn't do anything wrong." The door creaked open. Kashnitsky stood barefoot, blinking like a mole in sunlight. On the desk behind him, tools, wires, burned-out fuses. Next to them, a folded copy of Reklama Shans, the July 15th edition. He didn't run, he didn't smile. He just whispered, "I knew someone would come." What they found. Inside the room was a hoarder's nest of chaos and isolation. Journals with strange diagrams, cut-up newspaper ads, a baseball bat wrapped in duct tape. And in the closet, blood-stained clothing tucked in a plastic grocery bag. Forensics later confirmed the fibers matched those at the stairwell scene. A single hair found on Irina's coat matched Kashnitsky's DNA. And under the mattress, 2 homemade weapons. One consistent with injuries sustained by Raisa, but the most damning detail? A phone card with Leonid Andronov's number scratched into it. Interrogation begins. In the cold gray of the station, Kashnitsky sat across from Lev. No lawyer, no family, just a bottle of water and a stack of photos. Lev slid one across the table. Irina, smiling in a Polaroid. Kashnitsky blinked. "She wasn't supposed to scream," he said. "He said they'd just go unconscious, not die." Lev froze. "Who told you that?" A pause. "The man in the hallway." Breaking the silence piece by piece, the truth emerged. Andronov had called the number in the ad, met with Kashnitsky in a parking garage, offered him 5,000 rubles, about $1,000 at the time, promised it would be simple. "Just scare them, hurt them a little. I'll take care of the rest." But fear is a poor leash. And once the door opened, once the nunchucks were in his hands, Kashnitsky didn't stop. "It felt like time slowed," he said. "Like I was outside myself. I didn't think. I just watched." The question no one could answer. Was Dmitry Kashnitsky a cold-blooded killer? Or was he a mentally unstable pawn in a cruel man's game? Lev couldn't decide. He'd seen murderers. But this? This was something else. A killer who answered a want ad. A mastermind who never touched the victims. and a city whose newspapers had unknowingly delivered death to a doorstep. Lev stood outside the dorm that night and lit his first cigarette in years. The smoke rose like a signal into the black August sky. The ad gave him a weapon. The city gave him motive, and the silence gave him permission. He ran with blood on his hands, but what he carried was much darker. August 9th, 1996. A citywide alert went out at 10:47 a.m. Dmitry Kashnitsky had slipped through the cracks, literally. During a routine transfer from holding to psychiatric evaluation, he stabbed an officer with a sharpened spoon and vanished into the maze of courtyards behind the detention center. Now, the killer wasn't just a mystery. He was a fugitive. The chase St. Petersburg's streets twisted like arteries. Alleyways pulsed with noise, heat, and silence all at once. Kashnitsky ran barefoot, his feet raw, his breath ragged. In his hand, a fake grenade, a leftover from his stash. Not functional, but the police didn't know that. He's heading toward the Vyborg district. Do not engage without backup. He's armed. Civilians ducked behind kiosks. Buses swerved. And in the middle of it all, one man ran like a shadow collapsing in daylight. A city holds its breath. For 6 hours, the city became a hunting ground. Kashnitsky was spotted near a train platform, then again near a canal bridge. Dogs were brought in, snipers deployed. The news whispered of panic. 2 more schools closed early. Every parent looked over their shoulder. But Lev? He stayed calm. He's not escaping. He's spiraling. And that means he's coming back. The breakdown. At 5:13 p.m., police cornered him in an abandoned greenhouse behind a shut-down botanical institute. When they entered, Kashnitsky was sitting on the floor, muttering, rocking. The grenade clutched in both hands like a talisman. "Don't shoot," he whispered. "It's not real. Nothing's real." He didn't resist, didn't cry, just stared at Lev with eyes that no longer blinked. Inside his mind. The psychiatric exam lasted 6 days. Diagnosis: paranoid schizophrenia, acute delusions, audio hallucinations, paranoia. Doctors said his perception of reality had fractured irreparably. But was that the cause of the crime, or the result of it? Lev attended one of the sessions. "Did you know what you were doing, Dmitry?" Long silence. Then, "I wanted to matter." The full confession. In private, Kashnitsky gave a full statement. He explained how he answered the ad out of curiosity, just to see who'd call. He expected nothing. But when Andronov's voice came through the line, calm and cold, he felt something snap. He sounded like my father, like someone who believed I was useful. They met twice. First time, they just talked. Second time, Andronov handed him the money, described the building and said, "They'll be scared. Don't let them scream. Don't be seen. After that, you'll never have to worry again." Kashnitsky said he didn't plan to kill them. But when Irina opened the door and Raisa stepped out behind her, it was like a switch flipped. I saw 2 people who looked at me the way everyone does. Like I don't belong. Like I shouldn't exist. He didn't remember the final blow, only the blood on the wall and the silence after, the verdicts. Andronov denied everything. Said he never met Kashnitsky. Claimed the phone call was a coincidence. Blamed his criminal record for the suspicion. But the phone records, the numbers scratched on the phone card, and Kashnitsky's confession were enough. Leonid Andronov was sentenced to 15 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. No parole. Dmitry Kashnitsky was declared mentally unfit for trial. Committed to a high-security psychiatric facility indefinitely. He hasn't spoken to anyone since. One final visit. Weeks later, Lev visited the crime scene one last time. The stairwell had been scrubbed, walls painted over, new tenants moved in. But under the new paint, Lev swore he could still see the outline, just faintly, where the blood had pooled. He lit a cigarette and stood there, listening, not to voices, not to ghosts, but to silence. A silence louder than anything the case had given him. The unanswered question: was Dmitry a born killer, or a lost soul shaped by neglect, poverty, and untreated illness? Was Leonid a mastermind, or just a coward who pushed a fragile mind past its breaking point? There was no jury left to decide, only time. And every day since, the classifieds still appear. Different names, different jobs, same quiet danger. Because when you open your door to a stranger, you never know who answered your ad. Don't scroll past. Hit like and subscribe if you're ready for the next twisted story.